Welcome to Torchbearers by College Esports News. My name is Kenneth, and on this show, we talk with those carrying the flame of college esports at programs across the continent to learn from their expertise in a particular segment of our vast ecosystem. Just about 2 years ago now, I landed my first full-time role working in the collegiate esports industry right out of my master's program. At that moment, it had felt like everything clicked and set right into place. That all the learning and the studies I had done for 6 years led up to that moment. At the time, of course, it was the final destination, but in reality, it was just another step along the long journey that is my career path. While I felt reasonably prepared to take up the mantle and lead a program in a full-time capacity, I wasn't always super confident or as knowledgeable in coaching and team dynamics the way that a traditional sports coach might be in order to lead their team to victory. My learning wasn't and still isn't over yet, and that's why conversations like the one I have in this episode with Cole Prescott are so important. Cole is currently the Associate Director of the National Association of Esports Coaches and Directors, or NAECAD. In our conversation, he shared his passion for sharing knowledge, and the discussion made me feel just a bit more confident that I was along the right path in my own role as a mentor. Regardless of the different priorities a program might pursue, the role many of us play as educators can be incredibly influential in a student's development. And with the right perspective, we can strive to be even better teachers for the next generation of students. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Cole. Well, Cole, welcome to Torchbearers.
Hey, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So, first thing I like to start off with on the show is what is on the top of your mind for the first thing you have to do, a work-related responsibility, next time you get into the office?
Man, first thing top of my mind. Right now, honestly, it's the national convention, right? We're in full preparing and marketing and promoting mode. So right now, it's just kind of reaching out to coaches across the country, making sure they're aware of the event, figuring out what information and details they need to hopefully get them there to help, put something on their schedule for the summer that can help them network and grow and develop. So that's top of mind for me for tomorrow.
Yeah, probably going to be top of mind for you for another couple of months, I imagine.
Yeah. That's been the same answer the last 3 weeks, same answer the next 3 months probably.
Yep. Next up, want to get a little background on you. What's your story? Yeah. How did you get into video games in the first place? And then how did you get into esports and maybe eventually collegiate?
Sure. So my background with video games, man, was just honestly largely just playing with my siblings growing up as a kid. We would rent Nintendo 64s from Family Video when it was one of our birthdays, and we would, check out some games. Smash Bros. Was a favorite. The original Smash Bros. In the N64 was good, or Mario Kart. Eventually, our family got a GameCube, so that was like the main, console growing up for us. And then eventually it was a Wii. But I always wanted an Xbox because Xbox and PlayStation had the best Star Wars games compared to Nintendo. Nintendo didn't have Battlefront, Revenge of the Sith, these games that I was a big Star Wars kid. So that was kind of my gaming. I eventually got an Xbox. I don't remember how old I was, 13 or 16, somewhere in there, and got into Halo and Call of Duty and other games. But strategy games on the PC was a big thing for me growing up too. Love the Total War series. I'm a big historical fan, just love studying history, and so I've always been big into those games. My probably first dip of transition from gamer to esports involvement was in college. Was getting involved with playing a lot of Age of Empires 2 in college, and just which is funny because the old game came out in 1999, so even by the time I was in college it was 20 years old. But we just had a group of us every Friday night. We'd go down to a computer lab, and the 8 of us would boot up this old semi-legal copy of Age of Empires 2 on the campus computers, and another guy on campus loved to organize tournaments, and so he organized 3 different tournaments while I was there. My best friend and I in college kind of had this rivalry of like, we all played casually, and he was the first one to look up a build order on YouTube, and that was like Pandora's box, and it just became this arms race of him and I figuring out who could learn the best strategies and build orders. So I did win all 3 tournaments while I was there, and so that was a source of pride for me, to keeping my dominance in the Age of Empires 2 scene. But that was my intro to competitive, and actually it was my intro into how I ended up getting my first job in esports. The head soccer coach at Northwestern College, my alma mater, came and played Age of Empires with us one night from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. one day. And then he and another coach were responsible for advocating for esports on campus. They saw this happening around the country in 2019, 2018, and they said, hey, like, this is something we should probably do here, because there was this big conversation in athletics of what new sports do we want to add. They looked at 10 different options, and they went with esports as one of them. And so Dan, the soccer coach, and another guy kind of launched the program my last semester as a student. And so I was involved as a student. It was Overwatch, Rocket League, and League of Legends at the time. I didn't play any of those games, but I was like, don't care. I want to be part of this esports team. I'm going to pick up Overwatch because FPS games were the most accessible to me of the 3. I had never really played MOBAs. And so that was my intro to esports. And end of that semester, Dan talked to me and said, hey, I think you should consider applying for this job and taking over this program. You know, Carnish and I aren't looking to lead it. We just wanted to get it off the ground. So I met with the AD and kind of pitched in my vision, and they took me up on that. So I was hired part-time in the fall of 2019 to be the head esports coach while I worked in IT. And then spring of 2020, I had a meeting with the interim AD and the president and pitched them on making it a full varsity sport and transitioning me to full-time. So we had that meeting. They approved that. And then 3 days later, we sent everyone home for COVID. So I just snuck it in just in time. Not sure I would have gotten the job if we hadn't had that meeting before COVID. So so then fall of 2020, I started full-time and was full-time as the director at Northwestern College in Iowa for 6 years until this fall when I made the transition to join NAECAD. So that's kind of my journey.
That's awesome. We wouldn't have those starts in the basement LAN parties over the midnight hours into the wee hours of the morning. You start seeing the sun cracking through, right? You wouldn't have it any other way.
No.
While you were there. And I sympathize with the pandemic pain. The Ohio State esports facility was open for about 5 months before the pandemic. We were just getting the ball rolling. And everything came to a screeching halt. We've all been there. I'm sure each one of us has our horror stories of that time, and I'm sure it'll be something we remember for the rest of our lives. But wanted to get into the hybrid between your previous role and your current role, and want to start with a very broad question.
Sure.
First of all, what is coaching in esports?
Yeah, that is a very broad question. Man, it's a great question because it has a lot of different answers, depending on who you ask. I think, and a lot of times, I think on average in our space, we think of it as being very different from traditional sports. But I would honestly argue it's not as different as we sometimes can think, or it shouldn't be as different as it is. I think coaching in esports is very similar in that, in an ideal setting, you're positioned to be able to provide game-specific coaching, right, of a title that you're familiar with. But I'll even say, and I think this is a big reason why coaching is widely viewed differently, is because that's not often the case, right? Like even myself, right, Rocket League, Overwatch, League of Legends, and then Smash, I could coach Overwatch, right? Like that was the game I decided I will coach, and I worked very hard at that and became a good coach for that game. But the other 3, I didn't know that much about, had hardly ever played. learned what I could, but I was never going to be an X's and O's coach for those games, right? And I think that's okay. But I think what can be missed sometimes is coaches or directors or people putting together programs go, okay, well, I can't do X's and O's, so I can't be the coach. And I think that's missing a huge part of what a coach is, right? A coach isn't just about skill development of game skills. It's about communication. It's about time management. It's about defining and creating culture and standards and expectations and rituals. And so much of that is so beyond X's and O's. Because even by the end of my time at Northwestern, when I had started to bring in, like, we built a pretty good Overwatch team, which is fun that, like, finally they're ranked in the top 20 right after I leave. But hey, still built that team. But it's like, so we had these great players who knew a lot about the game. Some of them just as much, if not more than me, had played at a higher level than I had ever played. But there was still a lot of that. And I wondered, like, okay, am I going to be able to actually help these guys now that some of them know just as much for sure, if not more, about some of the game than I do? And the answer was emphatically yes, absolutely. But I doubted that, because I'd never, for the first 4 or 5 years, I maintained, I was better than all my players. I knew more about the game than all my players because I'd hit a pretty high level and I'd worked really hard on those skills. But that was a really eye-opening experience, or even just an affirming experience of there's so much value that coaches provide beyond just how to play the game, and value that impacts how the players play the game, like setting those standards, building that culture, creating structure of even the practice itself, right? So it was really important to me for the games I didn't coach that every day the players showed up and they knew exactly what was going to happen during practice, even if I didn't dictate the specifics of what skills they were working on, right? It was, hey, we're going to have our team meeting. We're going to do our pre-practice ritual. We're going to, you're going to spend 20 minutes in VOD review. Then you're going to spend, an hour in your scrim or ranked or whatever. And then we're going to debrief, right? So all the framework was there. It was just the specific X's and O's of what precise tactic or skill you're working on. You guys are going to do more self-guidance. So the captains in discussion with me as the director are going to set some of those frameworks. But honestly, like, coaching goes so beyond just the small pieces. And I think too, many people in the roles start to discover that coaching is also, it's administrative, right? It's not just about what happens during practice. It's about what happens before and after practice. It's recruiting. It's all these other things that go into building and running a team.
Yeah, right. I think the often overlooked part is, I think, in the coordinated team environment, your goal is to create a team that is greater than the raw sum of its parts.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you need better communication. You need a cohesive strategy. You need a team that feels like one unit and not 5 people in solo queue queuing up, each doing their own different thing. And I think that's where the idea of someone that is more central to the program to help guide and push that forward and through is important and critical, and probably the part that we don't quite spend enough actually talking about. Because it's the more important, arguably, piece of building that coordinated environment. But in esports, it's hard to find that coordinated environment. And I think a lot of the challenges we face in comparison to, say, traditional sports are a result of being able to queue up whatever you want to play a game with complete random strangers that you have no idea. Where do you think that sits with actually trying to reach players where they are and get them to trust you to grow into, a fully functioning team?
Yeah, as far as, like, just to clarify your question, like, getting them to go beyond focusing just on the game skills and just queuing up on their own, like, and buying into a structured environment.
Yeah. And like the belief that, maybe you know what you're talking about, even if you don't play the game at a high level, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because it's a real challenge, because the worst thing you can do, one of the worst things you can do, is pretend what you're not, right? Like, players will sniff out immediately whether you know anything about the game or not. So the best thing is just to be clear about, here's what I can't provide you, right? And here's what I can provide you. And so I think the important thing in that is being really clear on, here's what I am going to do for you. Here's what we're going to do. Here's why we're going to do it. We're going to warm up every day. We're going to VOD review regularly in this way. I'm going to make you create and write focus points before every practice. And we're going to debrief in this way, right? And we're going to practice this many times a week at these specific times. We're going to do all these things, and here's why. Painting as clear as you can, defining the why. Like, a big part of leadership is step one, making sure the people who are following you understand the why. It's okay if they don't agree with it, but they need to understand it, right? And if they're on your team, even if they don't agree, they need to go along with it, right? If they want to be part of the team. Like, it's okay. Hopefully agreement comes once it's proven, right? You asked about building trust, and trust has to be built on proof. But it begins with being clear around why you're making the decisions and structured the things you have created the way you are, and then letting the proof build the trust and be the evidence of why it's done that way. And that was definitely my experience with the Overwatch team and all the teams, of like, there were players who were resistant. They didn't want to do VOD review, right? They'd rather just play the game. They didn't want to do team workouts, right? They didn't want to go to lifting twice a week. Like, why do we have to do this? Like all these things. But over time, they start to get it and understand, because they see the results, so they feel the impact, right? And then the great thing is, it's always hardest at the beginning, because once you've established some of these things, once you've drawn a line in the sand and set the standards and then held them, the students that stick around and buy in, they buy in and stick around because they've felt the benefit. And then they become advocates and evangelists for the standards of how we do things, right? So that when your freshmen come in and they go, why do we have to do this? The upperclassmen are the ones saying, let me tell you exactly why we got to do this. Because you need to get better, because I want to win. So get with the program, like, so it's a process. It takes work, but it's definitely doable.
And if you want to be an advocate for the college esports space at large while directly supporting CEN's work, you can get yourself a cool new t-shirt at our merch store. You can visit acquire.ca/CEN and use code CEN for 5% off your college esports news merch order. The OG Torchbearer designed t-shirts are perfect for the upcoming warmer spring weather. But we also have fire hoodies, zip-up jackets, and a jersey, which you can customize with your own gamer tag. Again, you can use code CEN for 5% off your merch order at AKQUIRE.ca/CEN. Now, back to my conversation with Cole. I would say the next part is, why do you think, aside from the fact that collegiate esports has only been around for 10 years.
Sure, yeah.
Why do you think that there's no one-size-fits-all standard recommended practice for coaches? Because you would think, right? I mean, it's not like a coach's general mentality, or like what I'm an Ohio kid, so I'll say the two NFL teams I know, the Bengals and the Browns, right? It's not like their programs are actually all that different, probably, in terms of the day-to-day stuff they do. Sure, there's some culture pieces that are going to be different. Some things, the language they use is going to be changed around. But by and large, it's probably a lot of the same structure.
Yeah.
Why doesn't that exist here? And are we building towards that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say why it doesn't exist is because at least one reason I think is that not all programs are built on the same premise or built with the same objective in mind, right? And we see this issue popping up multiple places, right? I mean, you guys recently, were had some people talking around the shift of club teams and where they're looking to compete, and because there's lots of different programs, right? You've got club programs, you've got small varsity programs, you've got big varsity programs, you've got programs under athletics, programs under student life, programs that recruit, programs that don't recruit. So on the one hand, I think some of the disconnect of a clear standard is just in the difference in original goals. But even if you remove some of that, there are still probably a majority of programs that are still similar enough, relatively recruitment or competition driven, right, at some core level. And I think another reason is just inexperience. Like, even take my own story, right? I wasn't a college athlete. I played sports all through high school, but I wasn't a college athlete. I was a computer science major, not a sports management major. And I jumped into this role right out of college. So that's the story of many, many of your first generation and second generation esports leaders across the collegiate scene and the high school scene. It's just people who have the interest and the willingness, but not the background and training that you see across traditional athletics near universally, right? So I think that probably more than anything is the biggest reason is just it's young, and the people coming into the space aren't coming up through these similar pipelines, right? Anybody who's a head coach of almost every college traditional athletics team probably has a master's degree in something sports related, probably was a college athlete, maybe not, but has had a lot more connection, history, and just more exposure and more structure, and even just the opportunities for development, right, being more robust. Like, you look at the coaches associations in athletics, right, like the equivalents of NAECAD. Well, they have an association for every game, right? Like,
Right.
there's only the Esports Association. There's not the Overwatch Coaches Association, the League Coaches Association, the Rocket League, right? So there's just more depth of history and structure there, which is where some of that comes into play, some of that lack of standardization.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I mean, right off rip, different programs have different things they're looking towards, different goals that they're trying to achieve, and a different reason basically for existence, right?
Yeah.
And I think we all feel that pressure in separate ways. For example, in my program, when anyone asks me like what I do, I in essence say I'm a head coach for 9 teams, and that's a third of my job. And that's the reality of the situation that I think a lot of other folks in my shoes would empathize with.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do the math on that, if I split my 40-hour a week down into, small little chunks, maybe that means I get 2 hours a week with each of my teams.
Mm-hmm.
What is my role with those 2 hours that is the most impactful piece I should be attempting to instill into the players and teams that I oversee?
Yeah, that's a pretty loaded question, I'll be honest. But it's a good one because it's the reality of your situation, and it's not an uncommon reality of
Right.
of other coaches. So I think, if to answer your question directly, what's the most valuable thing you could do if you have that 2 hours per team? I would say emphasizing creating great structure and enforcement of those high standards is going to be probably the number one thing. It's going to be investing in the leadership of those teams and making sure you've got trust and buy-in from them, but also providing clear structure for those teams. So honestly, like, to break down practically, it might look like, hey, I'm going to use an hour to an hour and a half of that time to plan the week's practices, right? To know when they are, roughly what's going to be done, the flow of each, right? So that I can hand to the captain, hey, here's the schedule, Monday through Friday, whatever it is. Here's the schedule for the practices this week. Here's what you're going to do during each chunk of practice. And then having that personal connection with the leadership of the team, of making sure they're bought in, that you can mentor and develop them. That was something that I think is really important of as our program grew, I couldn't connect personally with every student the way I used to anymore. And so it became, okay, how do I equip and train my leaders more intentionally, spend a little bit more time with them and training them how to connect and mentor and equip the other students as well in a way that, those students don't necessarily just feel completely hung out to dry. So I would say that would probably be one of the big things. I really leaned into or felt that a big future of value that coaches and directors could provide to programs, with multiple titles, multiple teams, is how can you create opportunities to not just provide structure, but teach great tools, right? So a big part of emphasis that we leaned into is learning more skills around mental performance, because esports is a very mental sport, right? And so when I was first introduced to some of these things, I felt like, oh, this is the key. This is the key to someone like me being able to provide meaningful, impactful value to any esports team, to any esports roster, is if I can learn some of these principles and learn how to equip my players with some of these tools and skill sets around mental performance and around training, right? How do because I can't, I can't sit one-on-one VOD review all the time or even be, as present as I'd like to be. But if I can give you those skills and give you skills of training, teach you how to do really effective VOD review, regardless of your game, how to craft and create really effective focus points that actually dictate and drive training, right? We moved from this idea of goals to focus points, how to structure a 2-hour to 3-hour practice block, how to take breaks and why that matters, right? So giving players tools that allow them to facilitate their own growth, but in real ways, and training, not just teaching them. Because I think a mistake that I made early on was I would get up, we'd have our all team meeting once a week. And so I would teach these tools, but I'd teach it once, assume they knew it, and move on, right? And eventually it became clear, we need to spend a couple weeks on some of these tools and do more rounds of interactive. Hey, okay, we taught you, show us you can do it. Now we give you feedback on the focus points you've written or on how you're doing VOD review. So we slow things down a little more, spend more time really leaning into the development of those skills to make sure they're actually learned and usable in the students, because then they can really run with them. And when we made that shift, we saw huge increases in development in our teams.
Yeah, that's awesome. The more that you can get those students the actual resources, but the reality, right, is that they are still learning everything, and they will still soak up information. Yeah. But what I find some of the times too is the actual, even if you say, yep, okay, got it, right, great, move on. You check back in a little bit, they're not doing it. It's no matter how many times you try, feels like sometimes the ball gets dropped. You can play it all you want, but they won't follow the sheet. They'll just sit down, queue up for the game, play their 3-map scrim, and go home for the day without actively thinking about it, actively doing much of anything to it. What accountability mechanisms do you try to put in place to get the players not only on board and make it feel like it's not a chore that you're giving them to do, but something that will help them?
Yeah. I think part of that, again, goes back to what we talked earlier about proof and trust. Is typically when players engage in these tools and actually lean into them, they see the results, right? It takes a little bit of time. It's not an instant fix, but that definitely helps. And so having those more intense periods of supervision that allow for higher levels of accountability while they're learning them while they're not fully bought in yet, can be helpful, right? So structuring things in a way where it's like, hey, we're going to kind of boot camp some of this stuff for a couple weeks, and maybe I'm going to spend a little more proportional of my time with the teams while we get stuff going. Another thing is, just again, building that culture over time and that peer accountability. Again, having the schedule laid out I think that's also part of why, not just teaching the tools, but then providing the daily structure so they don't have to think about like, how much time should I spend VOD reviewing today? How much time should I spend on this? I kind of just want to queue up for ranked. Like, making it as easy as possible for them to engage in the tools is huge. Because if they have to try to self-determine, if they have to sit down and go, okay, what am I going to do today? I'm just going to queue up and play ranked, right? Like, so removing that as a moment of question of what am I going to do today, to know, oh, well, I'm going to show up and coach is going to have the plan kind of laid out for us. I think that can be really huge, because the reality is, if you're not present in the room, ultimately you can't, even if you are present in the room, you can't make anyone do anything if you want to, go to the extreme of it. But in reality, like if you're not present, ultimately they're going to have to make their own decision. And that's where I think the value, especially in programs that recruit or view themselves as varsity at a competitive level, that's where roster depth plays a big role in accountability, right? Of, hey, we've got our starting roster, we've got some subs, and we've got a JV roster, right? So that, hey, the motivation is, if you want to be on the starting roster, you got to be one of the best 5, right? You got to be the top 3 Rocket League players. You got to be the top 4 Smash people. Like, the motivation there becomes, do you want to play? Do you want to start? Do you want to be on the varsity roster? Because that also honestly frees you up as a coach because not everyone is going to want to put in the work, and that's okay, right? To be honest, like, it's not right or wrong. It just is. Every player is going to figure out for themselves, how much do I actually care? Everyone will give lip service all day long to how much they care and how much they want to play on varsity. But guess what? The players who actually care, they're going to put in the work to make sure they have the best chance at making that spot, And so I think that is a huge thing that speaks to another challenge that a lot of coaches face. I think recruiting is such a pain point for so many coaches, but it's also a solution to a lot of challenges, because if you can bring in enough players and enough driven players to kind of create and enhance that culture, as long as you've got starters and a couple subs who genuinely care, they'll do the things that work well more often than not in order to maintain their spot and achieve their goals.
I want to start picking your brain a little on that way, because you mentioned recruiting, of course, and something that I don't think about. I'm one of the folks that doesn't really go out of my way to hit the road and go to all the high school events and all.
Yeah.
But when you are in that position, how does your brain turn to see whether or not the student you're actually trying to go out and get is a solid recruit, that they will mesh well with the program, and that they won't be at odds with you the whole time?
Yeah, that is a great question. It's really hard to figure out, because everyone, when they know, it's like a job interview. When you know you're under scrutiny, you put forward your best, right? So it's tough. I think that's also why having a recruiting process that is long enough and varied enough for you to get as much information and experience with that student as possible is valuable. Connecting with their high school coach, if they have one, and trying to get an accurate assessment of, like, hey, what are this kid's strengths? What are this kid's weaknesses? Where do they show up well? Where do they struggle to show up well? Can be really helpful. Even just looking at things as like program history, just even academics, like, hey, how likely or not is this student to struggle or to excel? at our institution based on prior students who've been in our program and what their academic history looked like compared to this student. That can be a big thing. But honestly, like at the end of the day, my experience kind of taught me, boy, you just don't know until they get here. In a lot of ways, or like sometimes you'll get a sense of some things, but there were definitely times where I felt a little blindsided, where I was like, wow, this is not going at all how I expected it to go. And again, that's where roster depth is such a valuable tool of, if you're going to cause problems or resist the standard, no problem. You can sit on the bench and resist the standard on the bench. Like it feels weird to say, but a lot of things get easier, not easy, but easier when you don't feel at the mercy of your players. Because when you've only got 5 Valorant players, and like, oh, I mean, if we kick this guy or bench this guy, we got to forfeit or whatever. That is a really untenable situation for you as a coach and a leader, because now the players have so much more leverage, right? And even good kids, great students will sometimes try to push the standard and push the boundaries. And that's okay. That's natural behavior. They're going to do it. But having roster depth can just add to some of that cushion and comfort and confidence to go, you know what? No, we're not going to move the standard. And hey, that's okay. We've got, if ultimately you decide to quit, and that was a big game changer for me, is when I felt like I started to figure out recruiting, was like, now I don't have to feel so much anxiety about, well, what if this kid gets upset and whatever and quits? Because unspoken, that was always my concern. What if this kid quits? Recruiting is kind of my job, and if I can't keep kids, our teams suffer and my position suffers, and maybe I lose my job, right? So figuring that out takes away a lot of that pressure in so many areas.
The next part I have, and one of the I think challenges that esports in particular faces, is asking a player to sit on the bench is saying, all right, why don't you, instead of going home, queuing up for yourself in solo queue and playing a game, why don't you be involved in this environment, but not involved in this environment, and go sit over there for a little bit and just watch and try to soak it as much as you can?
Yeah.
How do you get those players to buy in? Because, I mean, granted, I'm not a hyper-competitive program, right? But in my experience, it feels almost impossible sometimes to really get them invested, involved, and engaged in what the team's trying to do.
Yeah. This is definitely an area of challenge with esports, because right, in every traditional sport, your practice squad is the rest of the players on the team. And in esports, your practice squad is whoever you can find online in ranked or scrimming other organized teams, right? You don't need roster depth in order to practice like you do with traditional sports. Yeah, I think the challenge there is, for me, again, that was why having JV teams was so important, was to go, our varsity roster is where we prioritize competition, where we prioritize, development and results to a higher level. And on our JV team, we can prioritize rotation and reps and development more, right? So that, I think, is, honestly, I'd push that to a lot of coaches and directors, going, having depth helps with that as well. Because it's, because if you set those expectations up front, hey, this is kind of our premier competitive team, here's the expectations for being on this team. If you don't make the top 5 or top 6 in this team, and you're not in the rotation, you're going to be on this roster and you'll get more reps, right? Or you'll at least get some reps, because we'll rotate you around, because we're willing to take some losses potentially by not playing our top 5 on team 2, because team 2's ultimate objective is not win above all else. Not that team 1's is either, spoiler. There's a lot of other valuable factors that go on, right? If we get into win at all costs, we've missed the point. But you still prioritize that in that way. I think doing what you can to develop opportunities. I think this is an underexplored area of esports coaching and training of, okay, we've got some players. How do we set up methods of training that aren't scrimmages, right? That allow us to utilize more of our players. And maybe it means not playing against the best possible team we can, right? But maybe it means designing and setting up a scenario that we're going to do 3, 4, 5 times to work a specific map or a specific strategy or situation. Or maybe it means doing in-house scrimmages where, again, the level of play is maybe a little bit lower, but we're really focusing in on these specific scenarios or these specific skills that allow us to develop our team holistically. And this is also, I think, where having an off season can be helpful in this regard. If there's one thing that I could kind of snap my fingers and change about collegiate esports, it would be, I think there would be a lot to be gained from moving away from this year-round model of competition where the same students are playing the same games, competing August through May, sometimes June. I think we lose so much focus because in that environment with your 9 teams, right? Can those 9 teams practice 5 days a week for 2 hours in the facility all together, right? Can you be at all their matches? Can you stream all their matches, right? No, just everything gets diluted. And can you as a player truly maintain a high level of energy, investment, training, and development for 8 months straight? No, you cannot. You really can't. If you only practice once a week and play a game once a week, you can do that all year, right? You can make that happen. But I think there's a lot to be gained from looking at alternatives to how we do it. And ironically, the publisher-run leagues get a lot of things wrong. But ironically, by nature of the way they do it, this is one thing they've kind of gotten right, I think, compared to a lot of the third-party league scene. Is there's only one CLOL season per school year. There's only one CVAL. There's only one, Overwatch Collegiate, right? And so everyone knows that's the season, that's the champion, that's the stuff we're focused on, and this is when it happens, right? And so I think, if you split it out, take your 9 rosters, if you can do 4 in the fall and 5 in the spring, now you've got 4 hours a week per team, right?
Right.
And now your players have more of a buy-in of this is the season that matter. These are the games that matter. Because, again, when you play all year, not every game feels like it matters as much. Or what really matters, the fall season or the spring season, right? Or is it, does this conference matter or that conference matter or that conference matter, right? So when we spread ourselves so thin and just play all year, I think we lose a lot. Even just story and followability, right? From a fandom perspective and an engagement perspective. I think there's a lot to be gained from considering, hey, what if we just change that model and have certain games in the fall, certain games in the spring? You can practice and compete more when you're in your season, and then when you're not in your season, you can do less.
Yeah.
Kind of a long-winded answer to your question there, but
you beat me to the punch because that's usually our last question, Cole.
Oh, that's your last question.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So you skipped ahead, and now I'm going to have to pull you right back.
That's all right.
But the next thing I want to ask, so player sits through, you recruit them, they join your team, they're on the bench. Now they become potential for a leader. What makes that good student leader that you've got your eyes on, and how do you nurture that out of them and help them fully realize their own leadership capability?
Gosh, great question. I think part of it is just calling it out of them, very specifically, just pulling them aside and just hey, you have influence, because you typically, these students that you identify, like, they already have influence, right? And even, this was something that the basketball coach at Northwestern kind of opened my eyes to. He was like, we all like to choose the players that we, would be okay with our kids dating one day, right? The good kids, the kids who are responsible and all this stuff. He said, but honestly, you need to look at your team and not ask who's a leader, but who has influence, because those two people aren't always the same, and influence is harder to teach and train than leadership, ironically. He said, get everybody in a circle, ask the question, and see who everybody looks at to answer that question, right? And
that's what I do.
Yeah. So I think there's something to be said for looking at people who have the kind of like qualities that you want the rest of the team to emulate, but also keeping an eye out to who's already in positions of influence, even if they're not the influence you'd maybe like. You're like, gosh dang it, why does that player have to have so much influence on our team? Like, and honestly, like, in our world, skill is influential. Like, that's going to be the first thing that everybody looks at, is like, who's the best player on the team, right?
Yep.
That person's naturally going to have some level of influence. It won't necessarily always last if they prove themselves, unworthy of being followed or of leadership. But so identifying that, calling it out in them specifically, guiding them through situations that arise, or again, giving them responsibility can be helpful. I think, for me, one thing I did with our captains was, I would meet with them all individually on a regular schedule. I met with them collectively on a regular schedule. I went through different books with them each semester that I had read to develop my leadership skills as a coach and director, and kind of, hey, we would read a chapter and we discuss it and we talk through how do these things apply to our teams and our program. And so taking, again, more traditional methods of mentorship and development in them, and I saw a lot of fruit from that, right? Like, it took some time, yeah. Again, took a little bit of buy-in, right, to get them to read a book, that they didn't have for a class. But again, kind of helping paint the vision of why, not just for today, but for your future. Like, there's good opportunity for growth and impact here. And hey, what are the things you value? That was another thing, is pointing out for potential leaders, especially connecting their opportunity to be leaders, to step up into leadership, to what they want to achieve. Because inherently, we all have our own personal goals. We all have our own desires. A lot of your potential leaders are potentially going to be driven individuals, and hey, like, what do you want to achieve? What do you want this team to look like? What do you want our record to be? Do you want to make playoffs? Do you want to make nationals? The best way you can do that is not by grinding another 100 hours of ranked over the next 2 weeks. It's by becoming a better leader. Because guess what? You're already the best player on the team, and you're not going to be able to solo carry your way to these goals. It's not going to work. So again, drawing for them the connections between what they value and a good path to get there, to help build the buy-in that then opens the door for mentorship and development.
Every program in the college esports ecosystem is built off of passionate student leaders putting in the extra hours and extra work to get the job done. If you're a student creative that might be interested in taking that next additional step into the esports space, consider joining the team here at College Esports News. You can gain real experience working on really cool content. For example, you can star in our videos as on-camera talent, or put together the final edited video that'll go live on our social media pages. With CEN, you can showcase your work, collaborate on a skilled team, and gain hands-on experience, all with a flexible time commitment. If this sounds interesting to you, or you want to share this opportunity with students or someone you know, head on down to the link in the description to learn more. If you don't have the time but might still want to support us, consider leaving a tip. Since our launch in 2022, College Esports News has been primarily volunteer run. We've been able to create over 300 pieces of content across graphics, videos, and written articles for viewers like you to enjoy. We are still fundraising right now for the 2025 to 2026 academic season, and every dollar, share, and kind word makes a world of a difference. You can go to paypal.me/collegenews to tip now. Thanks again for your consideration and support. Now, back to my discussion with Cole. So I want to take this to the next step, because if you haven't been following along, right, I've kind of been working with the student. Now they potentially graduate, and your program is growing. I think a lot of programs are going to be in a similar boat here in the next few years, where they start looking at potentially adding either part-time game coaches or try to get them in volunteer roles, or any form or fashion of an actual game coach. As a program leader, how do you identify what is going to make that solid game coach in an interview process without having to take a gamble, right? And where do you go about that line that is now shifting, where you were more involved and now hopefully you could trust this person to come in and lead the team, but obviously maybe if they're a part-time coach, you still want to be involved in some way or still be there to support the students. What does that relationship begin to look like from start to finish?
I think an easy mistake would be to, again, hire someone and step away completely. I think, if I was to re-enter into a director role and do this again, I would take an active role in these volunteers or part-time coaches or online game coaches, whatever the coaching structure looked like. I would honestly probably model it very similar to what our captain development structure looked like, which was, I'm going to meet with you regularly. The expectation in your hiring process, approval process, is that A, we're going to meet, B, we're going to meet as a staff, and we're going to continue to pursue our own growth and development through whatever means I've set up, right? Whether it's, just discussion, through books, through whatever, that the solution isn't just to hire people who are ready and can do it already, because there's not very many of them. There are lots of people who know the game really well, just like our students. Being a great player does not make you a great coach. And they just require different skill sets. So I think acknowledging that as well in the hiring process, the identification process. I think a great way to do it is just to present them in that discussion or interview process, present them with the challenging scenarios that you have had to face as a coach. Hey, so-and-so shows up late to practice. You tell them they need to be on time. It happens 3 more times in a row. What are you going to do? You're in the middle of a scrimmage and one player just starts yelling at one of his teammates, or, just gets up and walks out. What are you going to do? Right? Just navigating. You stick around long enough, you're going to have dealt with enough things that you can write up a little scenario book, keep a list. You might actually not even need a list. I'm sure they're burned in your memory like they are in mine. But just present them with those situations, right? The things that truly matter, because, the reality is, again, I think having, at most levels, having a hyper high level of game knowledge and strategic intelligence is going to have less of a competitive impact even than your ability to set and build culture, your ability to structure practice, to teach good training tools, to communicate well. Because I coached Overwatch players of bronze through teams of top 500 GM by the time we were done. and we spent 80% of our time talking about the same stuff, whether you were bronze or top 500.
Yeah.
It's so the irony is that for a lot of those players, again, like some of those concepts, and maybe I'm making it seem like it's oversimplified there. The players know the game, right? And if you keep up with them, learn, study the game, of course, but those other skills are going to be just as important. So I think that's how I would kind of handle some of the identifying process. Even just looking at, if they were part of your program, right? Like how did they handle themselves? How did they handle conflict? But presenting them with those struggles and scenarios being a good way to go about it. And then staying active in their development, providing or even enforcing paths for them to continue to grow. Because as much as I wanted to reach a point where I had it all figured out, never got there, never got there. And that's like the beauty of coaching and even what we do is like, we're in the development business. We're in the growth business. And so as soon as we start thinking that like we or our coaches or whoever like should reach a point of having it figured out, or even assuming they know what to do day one, is just kind of a mistake. Like there's always an area to grow, an area to develop. And so
always
creating
something
that
more
structure.
To learn.
Yeah.
Right. So last thing I want to ask that'll get us a little closer,
Sure.
hard hitting to home to NAECAD, I suppose, is obviously we've talked a lot about how maybe you as the program director are going to try to instill some of these tools, give as much resources as you can, and try to build something towards this. Where does your own personal development, professional development account into that? Why is that important? And what kinds of things should I be looking forward to get out of conversations that I can have? And what are the things I can do without having to take a plane ticket to the middle of Ohio?
Yeah. Honestly, again, I've alluded to it a couple times, but read books. Like the wealth of experience and knowledge and ideas and strategies around coaching is immense. There's so much. I said at the beginning of our conversation, esports coaching is a lot less different from traditional sports coaching and leadership than we might think or forget. Every summer, especially, I would read a couple books. I'd try to read a couple during the school year as well, again with the captains, but just honestly, like talk to other leaders in your space, talk to great coaches at your institution, right? Who have been there for a while and are building success. Find coaches you admire and ask them, hey, what were some of your favorite resources and books? like that just being a huge one. Connecting with peers directly, right? Like I had the privilege to meet weekly with the basketball coach at Northwestern who had been there for 25 years and who was a freaking legend. And the number of times that we had good conversations around just what to do in this situation, what to do in that situation was awesome. And that, that didn't happen until my last year, right? I met with different coaches at different points throughout my time, but like seek out the people in your area who are doing great work, right? Or even other esports coaches who, even if they haven't been around for a long time, because, none of us have been around for 25 years, just having those conversations, within your own network and just getting another perspective. Because a lot of us are in that situation where just all right, guys, What should we do today? Okay, here we go, and just additional perspective seeking is big. So those are the avenues that I would say, right? Whether it's books, whether it's YouTube, whether it's whatever. I mean, there's knowledge is not that hard to come by, but knowledge, networking, community, finding other people who are doing great things, who are having the kind of impact you would aspire to have on your students, I think says a lot. But looking inside of media, especially for college coaches, like make those inroads around your campus, because chances are there's at least a couple people around who have a lot of good experience and wisdom that they would gladly share with you, even if you think they're really busy. Like when I asked the basketball coach about meeting, I was like, there's no way he's going to have time to meet with me, right? He's got 2 assistant coaches. He's got a team of 20, 30 players of his own. He's got all this stuff going on. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. I would love to do that. People, I think, again, because he's a coach, he gets it. Like investing in people is his passion, right? And so the opportunity to invest not just in players, but in another leader of players, leader of students, is something that people get excited about.
I hope that's something we could all strive for in our 25-year future down the line. Cole, our conversation has been fantastic. I'll give you the floor if you have any other closing thoughts, since you already stole the thunder of the question we usually ask.
Yeah, sorry.
Any other closing thoughts or anything to round out the conversation today?
Yeah. Just that I think, I think there's, with all the challenges around the reality of our space, right, of being split between many games or feeling under-resourced or pulled thin, I think at the end of the day, one of the things I'll always hold to and encourage coaches to hold to is what your players are most likely to remember longest is how they felt, not what they did. And how they felt is driven largely by the culture you create and the environment you create, not the championships you win. And I think that's something that, again, speaks to, you don't have to be the perfect coach. You don't have to recruit the best players. It's about investing in your players where they're at, developing yourself as a leader, because that leaves a huge impression, right? Your players seeing you investing in your own growth, your players seeing you being willing to admit when you don't know something, your players seeing you change and adapt as you learn through experience. Like, all of that leaves a huge impression. The culture you set, the standard you establish, and the level that you push and inspire and direct them towards, like, that plays out over time. I think one of the most impactful interactions I had with a student was through a failure of mine to hold them to the standard, right? They were, you talked about earlier, what do you do with the player who's on the team but on the bench? This player was on the team but on the bench because they were ineligible, right? They literally couldn't play, and I can't put them on the JV team. They're good enough. They should have been starting varsity. So now they're in this situation, and they were constantly late, or they just would skip practice sometimes. And I was like, well, they can't really play, yada, yada. And eventually I was like, no, they need to be held to the same standard as everyone else. They need to show up on time. They need to be at practice every day. They're still part of the team. And sometimes we still needed them, right, to fill in a role or to help with VOD review or whatever, right? Because we tried to create active ways for them to be involved. And finally, near the end of the year, I said, hey, like, I've made the mistake of letting you slide below the standard. That's my fault. We're not going to do that anymore. He missed the next 2 days of practice, so I suspended him for 2 weeks. And he was really upset at first. Like, he felt bad. He didn't love it. But later that player told me, like, I really needed that. Like, I really appreciate that you held me accountable to the standard and showed me that it mattered how I showed up, And largely I viewed that interaction as a failure. I waited way too long. But despite all that, again, it really just hammered home for me that, like, the things we're trying to do and instill go so far beyond the game. And those are the things that will leave an impact that lasts. So holding students to those standards, like, that's what's going to push and help them in the long run.
That's when it's going to get them to enjoy their time participating in the program and going on to hopefully live a happy life.
Yeah.
Cole, thanks so much for the conversation today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate the time. Appreciate you having me.
You just listened to Torchbearers by College Esports News. Thanks so much again to our guest, Cole Prescott, for joining us. As always, I was your host, Kenneth Christina. Tom Screech collaborated as a writer on this episode. V. Tran is our editor. Sheridan Shea helped record this episode, and Derek Santiago is creative director of CEN. Be sure to follow CEN on X, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram to stay up to date on all things college esports. And check out our website at collegeesportsnews.org. If you liked this episode, please engage with it on social media. And if you want to support us even more, you can visit our merch store at acquire.ca/CEN or leave a tip at paypal.me/collegeenews. Thanks again for listening, and keep carrying the flame.